It's my great pleasure to welcome Jangeborg. It's a sort of my childhood fantasy. The 10-year-old me playing Fairlight, considering it to be not only my favorite game, but also the most prestigious game you could play, right? There were worse games, better games, and then there were the noble games, and this was the noblest game you could imagine. And then I imagined that the 10-year-old me learning that one day I'll be talking with Jangeborg on this stage. And of course, I suppose the 10-year-old me would die then. And I wouldn't be here. So perhaps it was better I didn't know. Let's sit down.
Yeah. Hi.
And I'll start with the most conventional question. What were your first encounters with computers and video games?
There was a really old Swedish computer which I had. I was using it a bit at school. It was based on the same processor that the Sinclair Spectrum later came out with, and that one had a small basic interpreter, and you could do some small stuff with it. So I managed to do a Space Invader, one Space Invader, walking across the screen, dropping one bomb, and then it was out of memory. So that was about well, as far as I got with that computer. But that was in around 79 or 80, I think.
And you mentioned that in the early 1980s, or the late 70s and the early 1980s, there was no such thing as a video game industry in Sweden.
No, nothing like it. So the only games we saw were the games you saw in the arcades, and those were the Ataris and things like that. So Swedish video game companies, no, none that I remember at least.
Mm-hmm. And when was it that you decided, and what did it look like when you decided to become a full-time programmer? I remember it had something to do with you working at the Volvo factory, right? Your first job.
I can't say that there was a sort of a conscious decision that, yeah, right, I'm going to be this big programmer or anything like that. It was more like I bought a Sinclair Spectrum. I started doing things with it, such as just moving one pixel across the screen. And that by itself sort of led to me doing more things. I started to draw a line, I started to do a circle, and after a while I realized, okay, I've actually created a graphic package here. So, I mean, I had all the tools to draw pictures and things like that. So, from there, it went to the point where I decided, okay, let's see if anybody's interested in this. So I went across to England and pitched this art package for a company there. And they thought that, oh, this looks really good. Yeah, we'd like to publish it. And well, that's how it started.
Yeah, and the program that was born in this way was one of the most important and most famous graphics programs for the ZX Spectrum, which was The Artist. Right, I still remember this. It had this title screen with the Escher's cans, right? One hand drawing the other, and I remember looking at it in magazines.
Yeah, really nice looking. Sort of, you have one robotic hand drawing a human hand. Sort of, they're drawing each other. It looks really nice, actually.
And when you sold it in the UK, the next natural step was to start working on a computer game, right?
Well, not quite as simple as that. Mm-hmm. What happened was that I think 6 months later, after I'd been across to England, I went back to give them the final copy of the art package, The Artist then. And while I was there, I saw them trying to figure out how Ultimate Play the game had done this isometric game, making it look so good. And I had some ideas on how to do that from a technical point of view. So I went back to my hotel room and during the night put together a little demo about how one would be able to do it. And that led to me actually staying in England for another 7 months and completing the game, which turned out to be Fairlight. So that's about how much planning there was before I started doing the game. It was, a spur of the moment, I would say.
And Fairlight, before we get to Fairlight, I can't resist showing you the game. Unfortunately, I'll have to leave the stage and go there, but I'll keep my microphone. For those of you who haven't played it, to see how strange and amazing it was for its time, one thing is that Fairlight, in the 8-bit world, it's basically not as much a puzzle game, because the usual thing you got when you had an adventure game, an isometric adventure game, there were rooms, and these rooms were challenges, and when you came through one room, you met another challenge and so on. And Fairlight is much more of a sandbox world. The most important thing in Fairlight is that most of the objects in the game can actually be picked up and carried, and you can carry them as far as you want, right? You can carry them to the other side of the map. And there is a physics engine with gravity, with inertia as well. So you could do lots and lots of crazy stuff in there. As I realized today, a lot of stuff that Bo never really anticipated. And I think that there were these two really good games for fooling around in the 8-bit times. One was The Hobbit, right, the text adventure. Nobody played The Hobbit in order to win the game. In some versions it was impossible to win the game because there were bugs. But everybody played it.
Gandalf enters the room, picks up the green doors and walks away. It was sort of
Yes, and my favorite feat was killing Gandalf, it's killing Thorin with dead Elrond, and then trying to convince Gandalf to kill Thorin with dead Elrond. And the other game to fool around, even better, was Fairlight. So now, excuse me while I move to the computer. I'll be running the Amstrad CPC version because this was the one I played. Można... Jesteśmy na tym? Okay. This was the moment, right? Nie da się zrobić na cały. Okay, so I assume you can see the game. This is the first room of the game. You can see this. Nie da się powiększyć. Unfortunately, I can't make it larger. You can see when I push this scroll, it moves. And there is a wonderful balcony in this first room. Now, the interesting thing in Fairlight is that when you kill a guard, he's not permanently dead, the helmet stays. And the guard will respawn wherever, because of course the helmet can be picked up, and the guard will respawn wherever you put the helmet. Why not have some fun with that? There is this safe balcony in the first room where you can drop the guards. And of course, there are loads of fun when they start sliding because of the inertia, right? When you walk around, they slide, they fall. Some of them are interested in you and follow you. Some of them become less interested and go another way. You can see that of course, this is an emulator, so I could make it faster. But if it was a real computer, it would barely be able to handle it. Well, the game didn't care about that. You could do whatever you wanted. And there's another interesting thing, problem solving. For example, in one of the first challenges in the game is to get a special crown. and this crown is on this huge gate, on top of this huge gate. What do? You have to gather enough objects in other rooms and make a sort of pile of objects that you jump on and you take the crown. You could do some other things which you were not supposed to do. For example, there is this chasm that you cannot cross, and Bo made it in such a way that you were not supposed to cross it. Now, when I was a kid, I discovered that when you drop stuff on this chasm, it doesn't fall into the chasm. So what you can do is you can make a bridge, and you can cross to the other side on this bridge made of a bottle of wine or a jug of wine and 2 potted flowers, right? This is the kind of problem solving that you got in Fairlight. So actually, if you think about it, it's a late 1990s or early 2000s sandbox game made essentially in 1984, right? It's a completely different philosophy of game design. And when I first contacted Bo, asking him why he introduced such a complex physics system into the game, he had a very short reply: because I could. And I think this is the key to what Fairlight is. Fairlight is not a I must do something game, but Fairlight is a because I can game, right? Yeah. You can do lots of things.
I should say, my background when I started doing the game is that I'd been playing role-playing games. So I started out with the Dungeons and Dragons in must have been around 78 or something like that. So I always had this picture of a sort of open world where you could go around and do whatever you like. And I think that was part of the inspiration for the game as such. It's not a proper role-playing game, but it's this thing that you can actually walk about and, do what you feel like, and figuring out your own way of solving the game. That was actually key to what I was doing, I think.
And in an email you made the confession that you never actually finished Fairlight without cheating.
No, that was way too hard.
Yes, of course, I was cheating here too. I used a version in which the opponents didn't take my energy, but I did win Fairlight without cheating, not counting this, the bridge over the chasm thing. Because we were convinced that you were supposed to do that it was one of the puzzles, right? So we always did it when I played with my brother.
I should say too that I think there was some kind of competition when the game was released, and the first guy who managed to solve the game did it in about 2 weeks after it was released. So it was possible to solve it, and he had a photo. I can't remember how they proved it. I think he had a photo of the screen or something like that he managed to get to the very end. So it was possible.
And then when you were at the top of your video game career, things started to go sour between you and the publisher, The Edge. Could you tell us something about that?
Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation. I didn't quite trust them, put it that way. And I was looking into going with some other publisher. And they, at that point, decided that they shouldn't... they wanted to sign me up for a longer contract. And the kind of pressure they tried to apply to me to sign that contract was to withhold money that I was already owned for Fairlight. And at that point, I was at the point of finishing up Fairlight 2. And so what happened was that I basically told them to go and do something nasty to themselves, and I went away from there, and we started talking through our lawyers. And in the end, what happened was that before we have actually sorted things out, they decided to publish the game in an unfinished state. So the first game, the first version of Fairlight 2 that was published, I doubt that it was even possible to solve it because there were too many bugs still left in it. So what happened was that several months later, we finally came to an agreement. Everybody was unhappy. Nobody got as much money as they should have had. And finally there was a complete version of it. But, needless to say, I never worked with those people again.
And those people, of course, were the Edge, a company led by Tim Langdon, who is still quite active. You might have heard about him. He's the guy suing everybody who uses the word Edge in their titles, right? And I think he makes a living of it because he even wins some lawsuits. So Bo was one of the first people to realize what kind of person we were dealing with here. Fairlight 2 is very different from Fairlight 1 because the thing that I love the most about Fairlight 1, or the two things that I love the most. The first thing, of course, the sandbox thing, right? The possibility to fool around with stuff. And the second also, it's very carefully designed. I mean, if you look at the space there, it's not just rooms and rooms and rooms, but it's basically a well-structured castle which has a throne room, which has barracks. In the barracks you will have beds
I should say that too, that if you look at the starting screen of the game, you can actually see the layout of a fair bit of the castle, and that maps quite well into the game. So it's just not sort of a pretty picture at the start, but it actually describes what you can find in the game to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm. And you can see that these are spaces that are lived in, right? In the barracks you have beds, you have tables, you have food, you have little pouches with money, and this is a very nice thing because you can use these pouches to distract guards. They run after the money first, and only later on after you. And all of this is absent from Fairlight 2 as it was released. How did you envision Fairlight 2? Because it's a much more ambitious game. It's a much longer game, right? It's basically, I mean, Fairlight was supposed to be a trilogy, I suppose, right? And it's...
There was never a specific end point for the game. To a degree, I had a vision of it. It was to create an open game world where I could put multiple games in there. So I've always been most interested in doing game engines, in a sense, or engines. I mean, that's how I started doing this art package, The Artist. I was putting together routines that then turned into a graphics language, which I then used in Fairlight, and in Fairlight I'd added sort of this engine for handling physics and so on. So it was a way of building a world, in a sense. How many games that could have come out of that, I don't know. Quite a few, probably, if I'd been working with a better company.
Yeah, so Fairlight 2, if you play Fairlight 2 today, you might imagine the best game of the 8-bit era that never came to be, right? Because the area is really huge, and I remember there's a castle at the beginning, then you get on a ship. I was ecstatic about the possibility to go to a ship, and then you cross the sea, and then you go to another huge castle. But as I said, you can see that it's an underdeveloped game, right? That it's just the spaces without the contents. I was surprised when I was writing an article on Fairlight, and I was reading the reviews of Fairlight 2 from the British press at that time, and they didn't really see much difference between Fairlight 1 and 2, and they said it's more of the same, it's lovely, it's excellent, which was kind of surprising to me, because you can see at a first glance that they are not.
Yeah. But what I've noticed was that people had very different views of what they liked in the game, and I think this sandbox idea, it wasn't something that a lot of people actually understood and picked up on. And if you didn't do that, then you probably didn't see Fairlight 1 as revolutionary as it probably was in a sense. And that's probably why the gaming press didn't pick up on that.
It's something that usually happens when you have an idea, a revolutionary idea that appears a bit too early, right? People just don't notice. It's in their blind spot, and they don't realize that they were dealing with something really great. Because I think for most people, Fairlight was basically something like Night Lore, only a bit more complicated, right? And this was it. This was.
Still today I get contacted from time to time by people who played the game in those days, and I think the common theme among all of them is just this thing that, I was able to pick up things and I could move them about and put them in any room I liked, and that was. It wasn't done in any of the games at that time, and I think that in itself was probably the key. As I say.
And the first my first encounter with Fairlight was I was reading a review in a Polish a Polish computer magazine, not yet a game magazine, a Polish computer magazine, Bytek, which pronounced on the cover Fairlight Game of the Year. It was the year was I think 1986. But this was the Polish press at the time. Somebody got a copy of Fairlight and played it. It's quite an interesting review because it's basically a summary of the manual. Of course, in Poland at that time you would pirate games, so you didn't get the manual. So you had to have the backstory.
We didn't do that in Sweden. We didn't copy at all, not the least.
No, of course. No, I know there was never any piracy in Sweden. No. And there was an interesting thing. There was a mention of different monsters you can encounter there. The phantoms, the soldiers, and also floating goblets with poison, which were never there in Fairlight. So I'm not really sure how much the reviewer played the game.
One of the best things that actually was in the game was this. Flesh-eating plant. It was really nicely animated too. There was a graphic artist called Jack Wilkes who did most of the graphics works in the game, and his animations were absolutely lovely. He did the guard. He did this plant-eating plant.
Yeah, it's a sort of a sunflower, right? That.
Yeah, sort of like a sunflower.
That is trying to eat you. Okay, I also read, because I'm always interested in games that never came to be, I read in the British magazines of that time that there were ambitious plans for the engine, and that there was a science fiction game in the works based on the Fairlight engine. Have you ever heard about these projects, or?
I never had any such plans. So to the degree that was planned, that wasn't planned by me, but by this company. So, but nothing ever came of that, as far as I know. But what happened with me was that I went on to. I had an idea of making another game, so I started to work with another company, and the boss of that company turned out to be a crook. Sounds like a theme, hey? And he basically scammed the two developers that he had started the company with, and so I left that company too. And in the end, I sort of left the computer scene altogether and went back to Sweden. And in my future career, I mostly worked with payroll systems and ordinary computing systems. But yeah, anyway, I was doing a little space game which was based on a technical idea where you increase the resolution of the screen. So in a Spectrum game, you had an 8 by 8 pixel square, which in which you could have two different colors, one for the pixels and one for the backdrop. And I did a thing that allowed you to switch that, so you could have basically two colors per line, which made it a lot more colorful. But unfortunately, the technique used up so much of the computer processing power that I decided to scrap the game in the end, because I didn't have enough processing power to make it a fully working and fun game to play.
And so basically you made two video games in the mid-1980s. Then you left the world of video games as a creator, and this is quite exceptional when you look at the people from making games in the 1980s, you're still an active gamer, right? You play computer games.
Oh yeah, I've been an active gamer since I was that big, probably. Playing, well, Monopoly or whatever. So and that never goes away. Still today I'm playing lots of different board games. I play computer games, all kinds of games.
Any thoughts on the state of the industry, video game industry today? Or in other words, what are your favorite video games right now?
My favorite video games. Currently, there isn't one that has me captured just today, but historically, my big favorite is Civilization. That I've spent countless hours on building little empires in that game. That's been great fun. So I would say mostly I'm a strategy gamer. I've been playing quite a few of Paradox Publishing's games.
Yeah.
So I've been playing, for instance, Stellaris now recently. So helps that it's a Swedish developer there too, I suppose.
And of course, the obligatory last question, which is usually quite silly, would you ever consider going back to the video game industry? And if you were to go back to the video industry, and if you were to find this wonderful publisher who would have infinite amounts of money to throw at you, and you could realize any vision that you had, what kind of game would you make?
I've been thinking about that question. He actually sent me some questions in advance, so I was actually... I mean, if I were to do something, it would be some kind of collaborative game. We actually had an impact on the world, so that some kind of way that you earn points by actually going out into the world and changing it for the better, helping the environment or whatever. And I don't know how that would be done, but I mean, I've seen games like Ingress, for instance, where you're actually out with your mobile phone, capturing portals and things like that around the world. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a wonderful little game. They came with a follow-up to that with the Pokemon game that came out last year, where you're also out in the world. And I mean, it feels like it should be possible to make a game where you're not just running around, but actually helping people do things and making the world a better place. That would be fun, actually.
Okay, so we'll keep our fingers crossed if you ever decide to return. Do we have any questions from the audience? The audience is not... Okay, we have...
Yes, I was just wondering if there were any plans for making Fairlight 3. Any ideas and plans or something like this?
No, there wasn't ever sort of a specific plan to make a Fairlight 3. As I said, my idea was to make a game engine that would have allowed us to make lots of different games, but also to expand on the Fairlight world. So it would probably, had I gone on with that company, if it had been a good working relationship, it could have been a multiple set of games. I mean, like you see with maybe, I mean, if you ever played, what's it called, Ultimates, the
Night Lore.
No, I was not Ultimate Play Game.
Ultimate Play the Game, you mean?
No, there was
Ultima?
Ultima, yeah.
Ultima, yeah.
The Ultima series, sort of something more like that, but in with this isometric 3D engine. So that is probably what I sort of had in mind for the future. So, but well, it didn't happen. So that's the way it goes.
Okay, I have a very simple question. Who owns the rights to the Fairlight trademark?
Unfortunately, it's not me. It's owned by The Edge.
By The Edge?
Yeah,
okay.
Because that was the final deal that I made with them, and it probably wasn't a very good deal. to be able to get some money for all the work that I did on Fairlight 2, and also the money that they owed me. So we came to a pretty bad deal, but that was the way I managed to get some money out of it. At that point, I'd already sunk in a lot of money into lawyers and things like that, just to, well, basically to sue them to get some money. We never went to court, but it still cost me quite a lot. Just imagine this. I mean, I was at that point I was 23 years old, and had to try to initiate a court procedure in Britain, and I'm sitting in Sweden, and to even be able to do that, I had to put up, I think it was £5,000, which was even more than it is today, just to be able to initiate the court proceedings. And so it was quite a tough thing, and I didn't have the monetary resources to do this in a good way, where I came out on top. So that's why it happened. But well, so they have the copyright now, and basically they've been using it to stop people from doing anything with it. I know a guy who did a sort of tribute to Fairlight by doing a PC version in full color, and it was looking quite nice, but they stopped it. So, well, there you go.
Actually, they stopped it so efficiently that I wasn't able to find any materials on the internet regarding this game. Right? It's not just that this remake. Right? It's not just that the remake is unavailable. Everything has disappeared.
I have a copy of it actually. So there is.
Oh.
Yeah. But.
Well, but you could change the name into Fur Dark, for example, and create the games in the alternate reality, for example. You know, like.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could do that, but to be perfectly frank, I'm not myself interested in going back and doing those games. It's a long time ago. I mean, it's what, 33 years ago.
Yeah.
The market for doing that kind of game is it's not very big.
Well, I would be very happy if I could play, for example, Fairlight on my iOS device or something like that.
I think you could at some point, because
using an emulator.
Yeah.
But
there was this official
a remade version
of
Fairlight played on iOS or Android or I don't know, Xbox Live, for example. It would be fun.
See, maybe sometime in the future when the Edge gives up its copyright or something like that. Maybe you can buy it from them.
Are there any further questions? You might show the poster if you have it, because
hang on a second.
Because Bo was trying to look for any souvenirs linked to the production of Fairlight, and the thing he came up with was an original poster for the game. With an interesting bit of trivia, because the guy who painted the poster used Bo as a model for the protagonist, who is
Way back in the back.
yeah, and the evil guy, the evil wizard, he's Tim Langdon, right? So.
This was before we knew what was going to happen, so it just happened to turn out that way. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so this is the treasure from the past. Okay, are there any further questions? There's one.
So, forgive me for my English, but I want to ask about which ZX Spectrum favorite games. Your favorite games?
My favorite ZX Spectrum game. I would probably say Lords of Midnight, actually, by Mike Singleton. That was me being a strategy fan. That was a really amazing game, and yeah. And he did some more interesting games later on too. I mean, I know he went on to do a game on the Atari, which was was the first one to use fractals to actually make a huge world simply made from one simple mathematical formula. And yeah, that was one developer I really liked. And as I say, Lords of Midnight was that's probably my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other questions?
If you want to see, I have your Sinclair made a little map over the entire game, which really nicely done. I can show it to you later on here on the side here if you're interested. Yeah.
I think it was also this map was actually copied in the Polish magazine Bajtek. Of course, the names of the authors were changed, but I mean it was based on this. It was, but the original was nicer, but there was a redrawing of this Polish in this Polish magazine. Okay, do we have any other questions? If not, thank you very much, Paul, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for listening.